Hello and welcome back to the Championship Lowdown podcast. I am joined after a while away by Chris. Welcome back to the channel, Chris.
Yep, another international break done and dusted as well.
Yes, absolutely. And we are back with our normal Championship review. So we'll be going through 6 highlighted games from this weekend action, as well as a little summary of all the games at the end. But first up, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please do. There is a large percentage of you watching who aren't subscribed, so just click the button below. It means a lot to us. But we will get straight into the action, unfortunately, Chris, because we're going to go straight to my Swansea City. Bristol City 3, Swansea City 0. Just a disaster for us all accounts. Rob Dickey with the early goal. Emil Reese Jacobson gets another one in the second half. And then Yu Hirakawa gets another goal through an absolute defensive disaster to seal a big win for Bristol City. And another loss for Swansea as we fall to 20th in the Championship. Obviously, stuff's changed in the last couple of days. The big talking point for us now is Vito Matos, as the day of recording, was announced as the new manager of Swansea City. As well as Joe Allen and Leon Britton rejoining the coaching staff for the time being as they look to transition as backroom staff. But in terms of this game, Chris, another disappointing result for Swansea.
I think it pretty much sums up your season as well. I don't really think you're in danger. I know I had optimistic shouts for you at the start of the season, but as we all know, those predictions are made to be proven wrong half the time in football. I think Bristol City without a manager as well, a team who were beaten last season in the playoffs and pushing to get back there again, sort of prove everyone wrong as well, because a lot of people did call it a bit of a fluke. Maybe they're not as competitive as some of the other teams you'd expect to be in the playoffs a lot of the time. So I think they're going about it the right way, but I think it was always going to be a hard game to go into without a manager.
Yeah, I mean, I knew what we were, up against. You're playing a team that's sat, well, I don't know where they were before the game, but they are now fourth in the league. So they were in the playoff positions going into this game. And obviously, with the run of form that we've been on, no wins in our last 5 games now. And obviously, our only win in our last 9 games was Norwich, which basically doesn't even count because of the form that they were in. But I mean, it's just another bad game. I mean, our last 3 games, a 2-1 loss, a 4-1 loss, and a 3-0 loss. I think it really shows the reality of the situation that Matos is stepping into. I think there's also going to be reservations because he's only managed 12 games in his career so far. Obviously, he was a very highly respected assistant at Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp, was supposedly responsible for a large part of academy players becoming big parts of the first team under Jurgen Klopp. If you highlight like Nat Phillips, for example, and Reece Williams when they came in during their centre-back crisis a couple of seasons ago. So it's obviously a highly rated coach. I think, look, I mean, the situation we're in, obviously, is another terrible performance. Defensively, was shocking on Saturday. We didn't create anything going forward. And, just especially that third goal, I mean, he's just wide open. And it says a lot about Darren O'Day, who's now thankfully left the club as well, who took the game on Saturday when he's bringing on Rico Santos and then putting Cameron Burgess at left back and Jay Fulton with 2-0 down rather than Manuel Benson, who's just sat on the bench, who I'm not saying has been amazing when he has come on, but I refuse to believe he's a worse player to bring on in the situation of being 2-0 down away from home than a 6'5" lump of a centre half and Jay Fulton, who's obviously a very defensive-minded midfielder. So Matos has got to work out for him. Obviously, we go into Derby on Tuesday night, which is obviously not going to be easy again. But I think for me, the big problem with us is just this team has to click and quickly, because you said we're not in any danger, but if these results continue and Sheffield United start picking up points as they did, which we'll get into later in this episode, then I think relegation becomes a real problem for us if we're not careful.
Yeah, I think a lot of you're boosted by the quality of the teams beneath you. I think I know we've said in the past that Norwich are too good to be relegated, but I don't think that's the case anymore. And I think that they're a team who should realistically be looking at relegation as a very imminent threat the way they're playing. Sheffield Wednesday as well. They're obviously faced with a points deduction as well that's hit them. I think the only team below you that will leapfrog you definitely is obviously Sheffield United.
Yeah, I mean, Sheffield United will climb up. If you've got Oxford below us, who I don't think we're worse than, but at the form we're in, I wouldn't back us against anyone in this league, to be honest. So it's a huge job for Matt Hoss to turn his team around because they just didn't look like they cared against Bristol City. I think that's the borderline thing was, I think only Galbraith looked like he cared at all in that game. I only looked like he was trying. So it says a lot about the situation and what the players felt about Sheehan and No Day, etc., based on the last few performances. But I will say, before we move on, it's not all doom and gloom. It's for Bristol City because, I mean, I want to highlight Anis Mehmeti in this game because he was absolutely superb. 3 assists for him in this one, and just him, Twine, and obviously Jacobson as well up front. It was just a solid display. Rob Dickey as well, obviously. Loves a goal against us for some reason. But just overall a brilliant performance for Bristol City. Exactly what they needed to do. Take advantage of a team in a struggling position, not let it be a banana peel in their playoff push. And, they look like they're in a very strong position to continue that as we move forward. But we will move on to the next game, and it was the highest scoring game in the Championship this weekend, Charlton versus Southampton. And I would say highest scoring game, it was the highest scoring sort of 20 minutes in this one, as Southampton absolutely rumbled out the gates in this one. 5-1 at half time. There was no goals in the second half. It all happened in the first half. Southampton were 4-0 up in 22 minutes in this one. Obviously, Ryan Manning, Adam Armstrong, Casper Yander, and then Finn Azaz with a brace. As Southampton looked like they finally clicked into gear. Charlton, again, I said it when we played them, I wasn't so convinced, and they've been pretty poor since that game against us as well. Falling down the table now, I believe they sit in 13th, having been in the playoffs just a couple of weeks ago. So it shows you how quick things can change for you in this league if you don't keep your form up. But I have to say, Chris, Tom de Ecker is putting a very good name for himself in the hat for the Southampton managerial job because he's been excellent for the Saints since Will Still was sacked and he took over.
Yeah, and you're looking at a Southampton team who we questioned in front of goal most of that run at the start of the season, and then they've just come flying out in the first half like that. And it is interesting you say, because I don't think many people actually pick up on that second half didn't have any goals when they see that scoreline. I know a lot of people have mentioned the score to me and then said absolutely nothing about the fact that it was all in the first half. It's just, but I think that could also sum up the type of season Southampton have, that they can have the first half like that and then just absolutely nothing in the second half. I think if there was a team who a scoreline like that summarises, it's Southampton.
Yeah, I mean, we said when was it going to happen for Southampton? When was it going to click? And it looks like Will Still was maybe get the reason that they wasn't clicking because under Eckert they've been superb. I want to say they've won every game since he came in as the interim because I believe Will Still was sacked after they lost to Preston. So 3 wins from 3. I'm not normally an advocate for backing the the interim as we've proven with Alan Sheehan this season at Swansea. But Tom de Ecker is a very highly respected coach in this space. And I think the way he has them playing, one of their goals, I want to say it was one of the Azaz goals. They just went from back to front. And it was a superb footballing goal. And that's what you want to see as a football fan, especially as a team of Southampton. They used to, having like Russell Martin, for example, in the Championship last time they got promoted. It was passing football, which is what got them promoted. And I think Eckert's trying to reinstall that sort of value in them. As well, they're clinical, which we didn't see under Will Still. Again, was it a confidence thing? I don't know. But as I said, when they played us, for example, they had like 3 XG and didn't score a goal. There's plenty of games where they were creating more than the opponent and weren't doing anything. And now they're taking their chances since he's gone. So I have no idea why they made it first sabotaging him or something because how much better they've been in front of goals since he's been sacked is laughable, really.
It's an interesting thing with Southampton as well. They seem to pass a curse on to Premier League teams as well. I don't know if this is something you've ever noticed, but so this season Liverpool went on their run of poor form with losses, and that came after having beaten Southampton in the Carabao Cup. And there is actually a season recently where they were still in the Premier League when Man City knocked them out of the Carabao Cup, and then Man City went on a poor run of form as well, similar to Liverpool's this season. So if you get Southampton in the Carabao Cup next season, any top 6 teams, I would just avoid beating them.
Can't say I would ever have picked up on that, but no, fair enough. But yeah, for Southampton, obviously they're 16th in the league. They're climbing and climbing, only 4 points off the playoffs now. Just to show how tight this league is, there's 4 points between 6th and 17th. So, there's still anything can happen in this division. I think I saw a graphic and it was like league leaders after 15 games. And I think of the last 7, they'd all been promoted by 1, which was QPR, who at this point were league leaders, finished 20th in the league because they only won 5 games after that. I believe it was the Mick Beale season where they replaced him with Gareth Ainsworth. It was that season, they only won 5 games after that. So, a lot can change in this league, as we've seen many, many times. And I think Southampton are a team that playoff teams need to keep a really, really good eye on, because playing Leicester next, then Millwall, it starts a bit of a tough run for them. But if they can continue this form, I would not want to be a team coming up against Southampton in the next couple of games. It is fair to say. But what do you think, Chris? Would you give Tom Derek the job, or would you go for someone else?
I think in a championship season like this, I think you can take the risk on giving him a job, because I don't know how much you can hope for to come from this season in a position like Southampton's. I know we've seen how quick the tide can turn in the championship, but if you're Southampton and you're looking up at the playoffs and you're looking at the teams who are still trying to break in, like Ipswich, and you're looking at the teams who are currently in there, who are you backing to drop out of those playoffs? Because I think the only person I'd realistically back to drop out of those playoffs for definite is Hull City right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm leaning more towards, for their sake, giving him the job. I think there was a thing that they are actually going to do it. It was either that or they're highly considering giving him the job for at least the rest of the season. And look, I think if you're winning games, it's hard to not give him the job. We're playing some brilliant football. It's hard to sort of pass that up. I think there's been plenty of times where we've seen assistants come in and they've been brilliant in their first managerial stint. Just take Danny Roll as a brilliant example of that. What a manager can be like when, just getting thrown in and say, let's just go for it. So I think I'd definitely keep an eye on that one. But I think for me, I would give him the job, because I think that there's a real chance they can get into the playoffs very, very quickly if they continue this form, because everyone in this league is horrendously inconsistent and is struggling to keep a sort of run of form up by Coventry's, for example. So for me, I would take the risk. But we will move on to one of these teams who can keep a run of form. And I don't know how many times I've got to say it, but they are inevitable. It's Coventry City. They were the 3-2 win over West Brom. We thought maybe, it was the beginning of the end for Coventry at one point in this game. Also, you go 2-0 down and think, oh my God, where did this come from West Brom? Then Jason Malumbi makes a stupid decision on a yellow card, gets himself sent off, and this game flips on his head. Thanks to Ellis Sims, Victor Torp, and Josh Eccles. Coventry come out with a 3-2 win to extend their lead to 7 points at the top of the table. I believe it is one of the sort of best points tallies we've seen from a league leader at this point, Chris. Are they going to be stopped? Can anyone stop them?
I don't see how you can stop them after looking at that performance at the weekend as well. I think you can lead into the red card having benefited them, but I still don't think that when you look at a performance like that, having been 2-0, regardless of whether the opposition have 10 men or 11 men on the pitch, I don't think you can back a team to have any sort of fall off from that.
Yeah, I mean, I said it with Ollie, I think, the other day on our preview episode. It was, they're just inevitable. You can't seem to bring them down. Every time we think, yeah, they're finally going, and then they come back and they do this again. I will say, Chris, I'm going to bring this up because it came up on my thing. There's a clip from you early in the season, I believe, 3 or 4 weeks in. I've got to bring it up. I have to bring it up, where you said Frank Lampard hit his ceiling in football, and you didn't think this Coventry team would be a side that got promoted because you think Frank Lampard's hit a ceiling. Are you retracting that comment now, or do you?
I've retracted that comment, seeing this sort of performance. But I think you've also got to look at the way that teams like Middlesbrough, who were chasing, are starting to slip up as well. You can't, when you're Middlesbrough, you can't keep making these sort of mistakes. They've drew to Oxford this weekend. That's big points to drop when you're in Middlesbrough's position chasing a team like Coventry. So I won't take too much away from Lampard and what he's done at Coventry, because I will still retract that statement. But I think at the same time, this is what football's about, comments like that being made and proving them wrong to a degree.
Yeah, I had to bring it up because it came up the other day, and I thought with the form that they're in, I feel like I can't not bring that up. But yeah, look, they're such a brilliant team. I think it's just the way they score goals for fun. I mean, it's an absolute insane amount. 43 goals in the Championship after 16 games. I mean, that is unheard of in this division. I'm trying to look here. I think Hull at 28 are their closest competitors in this division. So it's not even close. They're scoring for fun. It's another 3 goals in this game. And it reminds me of the shades of the old Man City teams where their defence wasn't great, but they would just outscore everyone, and that's how they won games. So they've conceded 15 goals, so they're definitely not top of the league in that metric. But it was one of them teams that just score, so that any goals they conceded didn't matter anyway because they would just outscore everyone. And that's what they seem to be doing. I mean, they've bounced back from that Wrexham result superbly. Coming out with a win at Sheffield United, a win against Stoke, and a win now against West Brom as well, and a bit of a little rivalry game. They're always quite tough. And also it's a derby, by the way. I don't want to get crucified by Coventry fans for trying to force them rivalry, or West Brom fans forcing rivalries onto each other. But a local rivalry as such, this was quite a big game. I saw obviously the whole thing about Coventry is the boycotting from away fans. We saw West Brom not sell out that allocation, which they obviously would in normal circumstances because of the £45 price tag label on that game. Also, as a Swansea fan, I'm going to have to pay £45 to go see us on Boxing Day against Coventry. So for me, I can understand West Brom fans doing it completely. I think it's ridiculous and they should not be allowed to be charging that much. The sooner the Championship brings in a cap for tickets on prices, ticket prices will be brilliant. But for me, I say West Brom though, signs of life, Chris, after a bit of a rough patch for Ryan Mason. A little bit they did lose, but sort of a forgivable one.
I think when you look at the team, the opposition they've played, yeah, it's forgivable. When you're 2-0 up, is it forgivable? There's ways of looking at it from both angles. But yeah, I think I'm somewhere in between on that because of just the difference in the fact that they're 2-0 up, but then they're playing a fantastic team also.
Yeah, my only argument I would normally agree, but I think Malumbi's silly decision. I think that's the difference in this game more than a tactical mishap or just letting 3 goals. I think, do they lose this game? If that doesn't happen, I don't think so because they were fairly all right where they were. I think they probably would have drawn, but I don't think they would have lost, personally anyway. But it's just silly decision to do that on a yellow card. I cannot believe he decided to do that because it's obviously going to be a yellow card. 100 times you get booked for that sort of challenge. So an absolutely ridiculous decision to make, but a probable forgivable loss for West Brom as they look to try and reclaim some of that form after a pretty poor period under Ryan Mason. Speaking of managers, we had a new one debut in the Championship this weekend, Philippe Clement at Norwich, and it did not go the way that he would have wanted. A 4-1 defeat for the Canaries at St Andrews. Marvin Duksh and Jay Stansfield with a brace each cancels out any comeback from that Coventry Garden goal early in the first half as Norwich are defeated again. And I believe their last win was August 30th in this league, in any competition, actually. They have not won a game since August 30th, where they beat Blackburn at Ewood Park. I mean, Chris, you have to say Philippe Clement's got a heck of a job on his hands, as you've already sort of mentioned in this podcast, to get this Norwich side out of trouble because you're not so convinced that they're sort of too good to go down anymore.
Yeah, I know you were looking at the quality, but I mean, you've got to look at the player ratings in that game, and some of them are awful in terms of ratings. Jack Stacey and Topic come to mind on those ratings. But, and especially this Birmingham side, who we've seen can be so topsy-turvy in this division as well since coming up. So it's fantastic for Birmingham, who need to try and find some consistency, which a result like that is a massive boost. And I think if anyone needed goals in that team, it was Jay Stansfield. But Norwich, I just don't see a way out of it. And you look at their fixtures and you wonder where their next win's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, Philippe Clement's obviously, it's a big pedigree manager to have in this division. You look at win percentages, he's never been at a club with less than a 50% win rate. Obviously, 57 at Bruges, 51 at Monaco, and 64% win rate at Rangers. So, it's a high pedigree manager that you bring into this division. And I think it's a good appointment. I think it's a smart one to make because you have a guy who's good at getting results out of teams that maybe you don't expect from certain points. So I like the appointment. I knew this was going to be a tough game. Me and Ollie sort of spoke about it on the preview. It was St Andrews is more or less an impossible task, bar Hull, if you're Hull City, apparently, to get anything out of it. You're lucky to get out with a draw most times, but obviously only one loss so far this season, one loss in the last 2 years in the league for Birmingham St Andrews. So, it's never going to be an easy game. So I think it was a very, very harsh one to drop him into. I think next week you have a big opportunity. Next week on Tuesday night, you have a very big opportunity to get a 3 points home against Oxford. Haven't won a home game all season. It would be a big, big chance to sort of turn these fans back to, supporting this club, get behind this club, because we've seen protests, we've seen negative booing in every game, and absolutely fine, justifiable based on the product on the pitch. But yeah, I think is this the big opportunity, Chris? Struggling Oxford team at home to get your first home win. It would be the perfect way for Philippe Clement to sort of announce himself to these fans.
Yeah, but I think that's also going to be a tough ask when we look at the fact that Oxford can be so dangerous at times, and I think a lot of that is how much they're underestimated by the rest of this division. And I think a case can certainly be made for the fact that Middlesbrough underestimated them this weekend. So I think if you're Oxford coming into this game, you're massively confident against a team who are in a worse position than you, and you're looking to just pile misery onto them. I think that point against Middlesbrough could absolutely give them some confidence.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's a big result against Middlesbrough. You take a team second in the division and you get a point. And Oxford are a weird team to sort of call. They had a pretty poor run of form going into it. A big loss at home to Stoke and a pretty poor loss to West Brom. Obviously, we mentioned we're not in a great run of form at all when that game happens. And they're very inconsistent. This is a team that drew to Coventry, drew to Leicester, but then, lost to a struggling Sheffield United team, lost to Watford, lost to Wrexham. So it's hard to, pick apart with Oxford, but, they are 21st at the end of the day. This is the team that you are chasing to get out of the relegation zone at this precise moment in time. So, a win would pull them, I believe, within 2 points of that Oxford team. And that's huge at this point in the season to make sure you don't get cut adrift, because Oxford pick up 3 points. Then, you're looking at an 8-point gap for Norwich. And that's a lot, regardless of how early or late you are in the season. 8 points is a big gap to close, especially when you're not in the best run of form. So, for me, it's a must-win game in my opinion for Philippe Clement. I think you're going to lose fans very quickly if you start with 2 losses, especially with a loss against a pretty poor team in the league, all things considered. But I think there's so much talent in this Norwich team. It has to click soon. I'm not saying they're guaranteed to stay up, because absolutely not. As you said, they're very much in trouble. They're probably the second biggest club in trouble at the minute in terms of relegation, bar Sheffield Wednesday, of course. So yeah, I do sort of see your point, Chris, about they're a struggling team, but for me this has to be a must-win game against Oxford.
Yeah, and I'd still fancy Oxford to nick a point tomorrow in the midweek fixture. I would.
Well, we'll soon find out, won't we, in sort of the next 24, 48 hours how that one goes, but it will be a huge test for Clement in the current situation. We'll move on to another, golf thrillers everywhere this week. It's not normal we come on these review shows and we've got loads of goals to speak about. It's normally which 1-1 are we going to talk about, which 0-0 can we bring up. But another 5-goal game, this one. This time we're going to go with Derby at home against Watford. And it all looked plain sailing for Derby in this one, Chris. Looked like they're going to come away with a big 3 points, but it was not meant to be, as Watford come back from 2-0 down, I believe it was, thanks to Kieramgard, and 2 goals from arguably for the player of the week in the whole league this season, Edo Kayembe, who gets 2 goals from centre mid, including a late 88th minute penalty to seal the big 3 points for Watford. And I think me and Ollie spoke about this quite a bit. This Watford team have been electric at times on the attack in the last couple of weeks. And it looks like they're finally starting to pick up the results that reflect their performances in recent weeks, Chris.
Yeah, I know me and you have also spoke about them in the past and how weird they are as a team, but they just need something to get them clicking. And a big factor in the fact that they can't click is that they never have patience with a manager. So I think this is a club that needs to learn from its mistakes in that regard. because you can't ever expect performances when you're changing your manager every few months, sort of thing. It's such a weird division at times when you look at games like this, because these are two teams who have done this a sort of 3-2, and then both of these teams are perfectly capable of going out there in the next game and having a ball 0-0.
Yeah, I mean, Derby, obviously, you come into this game, they've won 5 games on the spin, and we spoke about with them, they're really starting to build a bit of form, and I think this is going to be the sort of pivotal moment for Derby, how they respond to a loss after such a good run of form, because as we see it so many times, when the team on a good run hits a wall and they lose, it could tend to spiral into multiple losses, so they've got to be careful. But obviously, facing Swansea on Tuesday night, you'd back them, with the disarray that we're in at the minute, you'd back them to get a result at least a point away to us, a place we've not really been good at home this year either. But for Watford, I think the statement always has been they're impossible to predict, because you never know what Watford you're going to get. But for the last couple of weeks, we've got the Watford which we sort of all expect based on the quality of players. They've not lost in the last 4, albeit 2 draws, but against Ipswich and Bristol City, and that's 2 very, very good sides in this division this year. So it's no mean feat getting points there, especially away at Portman Road. Beating Middlesbrough 3-0 as well is a big statement to this league, that maybe you're sort of not as bad as you may look as far as your league table goes. Even at the loss at Coventry, I think even Coventry fans were saying how good they were at times, especially going forward. They were very, very electric on the attack, and we're just unlucky that Carl Rushworth was having an absolute mental game in that one, which stopped them getting anything out of it. So for Watford, I really do like the team. I've said so many times, there's so much talent as Watford team on paper. And it was a bit like Stoke. We always said every year they've got loads of talent, but it never works. It never clicks. And both of them this year seem to be clicking more than they normally do, which is good to see, because it's nice that these good teams, quality-wise, are finally rewarded with results on the pitch. But as far as Derby go, it's a loss. I believe there's rumours that Carlton Morris picked up an injury in this one, and I've seen some rumours about an ACL. He did come off after 18 minutes. I hope that's not the case for Derby, because obviously that's your top scorer. That's been your pivotal man all year. To lose him would be bad for this football club, I think. But what do you think, Chris? I mean, for Derby, if they lost Morris, you'd have to feel like that's going to take a big dent in their chances of pushing up the table.
It's almost guaranteed that you have to spend in January if they lose Morris, and it's an ACL. I don't think there's any questions about that whatsoever, because without Morris, they're going to slip right down into that relegation fight, I think. This table is so wide open everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I hope, as I said, I hope it's not the case, because he's been brilliant this season. You never want to see good players getting injured. But as you said, it could be trouble. Really could be trouble. Because I've said many times about how I don't think Padre Aguiman is the player that they thought he was when they paid 7-8 million quid, I believe it was, for him in the summer. I don't think he's that good, especially not in a clinical goal scoring sort of scene. He seems to be more of a creative player at Derby so far, setting up rather than scoring. So you're then leaning on a guy who's got 1 goal all season to sort of drag you out of a mess if Morris is out for the long term. So you'd have to hope for their sake that he's not a bad injury, because, as I said, it could be detrimental to their whole season. But John Eustace is a manager who's known for getting good out of players who don't look brilliant on paper. I mean, you see with their team now, if you rank this team on paper in the league, you're probably putting it in the bottom 4 or 5 teams, in my opinion. There's quality. You got Barrett and Diaz, who I'm assuming will also become a pinnacle part of this team if Morris is injured. I believe you got him and Aguiman. You've got to rely on them, because I don't think with the spend that they made in summer, you can afford to go spend big on another striker. But you've got Callum Elder and Joel Ward, which I wouldn't even pair as a wing back pairing in League One. So the fact that they're performing so well is a testament to John Eustace, in my opinion. Obviously, you've got Sondre Langas in that defensive mode, is a big part of what they're doing. So for me, it was 2 very good teams. I think it showed in the result, Chris. But overall, Derby will be worried about Carlton Morris and wait for the news on him. But we have one last game for you, and I'm assuming you know exactly where we're going here. Funnily enough, it's not going to be like QPR Hull. As much as it was a good game, we have to go to the Steel City Derby, of course, at Hillsborough. And it was not the day that me and Ollie predicted it could be for Sheffield Wednesday. It wasn't their big day in a packed-out Hillsborough. It was Sheffield United who stole the show at Hillsborough, a 3-0 win in the big derby game. Obviously, we know so much about the Steel City derby, the hatred between these two clubs. And Sheffield United turn up big time. Tyrese Campbell with a brace and Tom Cannon, a rare goal from him, which is mental to say with his price tag, to seal this one off. See them celebrating on the pitch after, Chris. It's got to sting really badly as a Sheffield Wednesday fan in what's already been a terrible season. It's just got a lot worse.
Yeah, and I think the worst thing to see about this was the criticism I saw from neutrals after the game. Neutrals saying they've never seen players perform as poorly as Sheffield Wednesday did in a rivalry game. Criticisms like that from people who probably know very little about what this club has been through to start off this season. Fans not sure on whether they're going to have a club to go and watch and things like that, and players not getting paid. So I can see where they're coming from, but I'm also of the perspective, I think if there's any club, if there's any team that deserves some slack for a poor performance, regardless of whether it's a rivalry or not, it's Sheffield Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen signs of life out of Sheffield Wednesday in recent weeks. The results haven't been there, but there's been good performances. Draws against West Brom and Norwich, albeit poor teams, but they've not been losing games by big amounts. 1 goal lost to Charlton, 1 goal lost to Middlesbrough, 1 goal lost to Oxford, 2 at Southampton, who are on fire. So it's hard to see a team like that getting absolutely pasted off their biggest rivals. It's not ideal. But as you said, got to cut them some slack. Obviously, everything that they've been through in the last sort of however many months it's been. Looks like it's all finally turning around for the positives now. So, Chansiri is gone. They've been allowed to sign free agents, which saw them bring in Liam Cooper last week. So, it's not all doom and gloom for Sheffield Wednesday. I think we sort of said, though, it was the one thing they basically had left to play for this season. They're not going to get out the relegation battle. They're going to go down. I think we know that now, bar an absolute miracle to drag them out of it. So, I think, this was their one big chance. I think me and Ollie referred to it on this week's preview. It was like their big chance to, give their fans something to sort of cling on to, that one bit of hope for the rest of the year, winning big at Hillsborough. But I suppose they've still got another chance to avenge it when they go to Bramall Lane later in the season. And I think that, by that point, it really will be all they have to play for. But I think the biggest thing for Sheffield Wednesday fans, Chris, is it's given Sheffield United a big boost in climbing out of that relegation zone.
Yeah, and I don't fancy them to be there much longer at all, really. They're the complete opposite of Norwich. I think they are too good to be relegated. They just made the completely wrong decision at the start of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it was baffling at the time to see why you get rid of someone who got you to a playoff final, and then you bring in Ruben Sellers, who was an absolute train wreck, and you then bring Chris Wilder back in as sort of on a rescue mission to make sure this team does not slip into League One, because that would be fatal for a club like this to drop into League One. So I didn't think it would ever happen, and this I really am now. Like, I could probably be 100% convinced they're not going to be relegated when it comes to May, but. As you said, this is a big win. This is the morale changer for Sheffield United now, to sort of, you beat your biggest rivals 3-0 at their ground, to turn around your form. 1 point outside of the 1 point of getting out of the relegation zone. You've then got to look at it and be like, right, let's kick on now. We have an opportunity to build on a run of form where, this team is so uber talented, right? You've got so many brilliant players in this team. I think it's important to reaffirm that, you've got Tyrese Campbell's excellent. I think Callum O'Hare has been one of the better midfielders in this division for a while now. City Peck's a great young talent. There's Jaffet Tanganga, Ben Mee, Michael Cooper. There's so much talent at the Sheffield United team. And they had a really poor run of form after that back-to-back wins. They'd lost 3 out of their last 4 games before this Sheffield Wednesday game. So now with Portsmouth next, that's another big opportunity to pick up 3 points, in my opinion. And Sheffield Wednesday, I mean, you're basically just playing for pride at this point, Chris. Another bad result, and a trip to the Den on a midweek game is not what you want to see on a bad run of form.
No, but I just don't see where the form picks up for them either. I mean, you feel free to make a prediction, James, because your last Sheffield Wednesday prediction went so fantastically well of his podcast. So
In fairness, right,
Sheffield...
what I will say about prediction is, after the week where I said it and they won straight after, they haven't actually won since then. So I might be one game wrong on my prediction.
So just predict them to never win again. Just predict the
Wednesday,
Millwall win on Wednesday. If Sheffield Wednesday beat Millwall on Wednesday or Tuesday, whichever.
Millwall fans, please don't attack me, because this did happen last time. I said Sheffield Wednesday won't win until January, and they won the game after. So, to be fair, I really don't think they will win until January, based on looking at these schedules. But again, I said it last time, so I can only apologise, Millwall fans, for the impending battering you're going to get at home against the worst team in the division on midweek football as well, just to add to it in the freezing cold and the dark. But we'll have a look through now of the other results from this weekend's action, because it was a very good week of Championship football for a change, Chris, as we seem to review a lot of dull, boring games on this channel sometimes. We'll start on Friday night, a little quick summary of each game. Preston versus Blackburn. Blackburn come up with the upset against the playoff Preston, get a 2-1 win at Deepdale thanks to Miller and Johnson, cancelling out Alfie Devine goal, which was scored in some of the most hilarious fashion I've ever seen this season as far as a goal conceded. I mean, a diabolical defending from Blackburn for that goal. I think there's like 4 players on the line and they all missed it, and they still squeezed it in for a goal. But a big win for Blackburn, Chris, and for Preston, into 5th now, and that's one of the teams you might have a look at as thinking they might drop away from that playoff race if they're not careful.
Yeah, I think Championship as well. It's funny we say that, because if there's one league you can guarantee on for a comical goal, it's for Championship half the time. I feel like there's been one in the past every game week, the past 4 now.
Probably. I would not be surprised. But yeah, look, Blackburn, they're a weird team, aren't they? They're so weird. Every time you think you got them nailed on, they've won 4 of the last 5 games, including wins against Southampton, against Leicester, against Bristol City, and now Preston. They beat, very, very good teams in the last 5 games. So this isn't a team, they're 18th in the division, which sort of speaks volumes about how bad they started to be 4 of the last 5 wins. They've only won 6 games this season. So they're certainly on a good run. Obviously, they've got QPR, Wrexham next 2 games. You have to look at them as potential wins as well. But for Preston, they've got to be careful, because this league is so topsy-turvy. And any sort of mistake like this, and you could be in big trouble of sort of falling away from contention in the playoff spaces. Next up, we go to Ipswich versus Wrexham. And I don't think we'll have much to say about this one, Chris, because it was the only game in the Championship without a goal this weekend. It was a 0-0 draw at Portman Road. I will say a big shout out to Arthur and Conquo, because he was brilliant in this game to make sure that Wrexham, as you said to me earlier in the recording, Chris, one of the only teams in the league in the last 5 games. I believe they are the only team in the last 5 games in the league to not have lost the game, and they kept it going with a big point away at Portman Road.
Yeah, and we've just spoke as well about praising teams picking up points at Portman Road this season as well. I think for Wrexham, they'll be the sort of they'll solidify themselves in the Championship for a couple of seasons before pushing on. This season is definitely just a solidify season, and they're on the right track to do that.
Yeah, I mean, as at Ipswich, they continue their unbeaten run. Obviously, they'll be disappointed not to back up a big 4-1 win at Swansea with another result here. Disappointed not to get all 3 points at home. That's back-to-back home games where they've been held to draws. But unbeaten in 5, they're finally sort of creeping into that playoff picture now, into 8th, just 1 point outside of Hull, who are sat in 6th. So you have to think they're going to be a scary team for the rest of the season in terms of pushing on, potentially even automatics, with Middlesbrough on a bit of a shaky run of form as it stands. We'll then talk about another team in that top sort of 3 is Stoke City. They were defeated by Leicester City this weekend, thanks to Mavididi and Patson Daka getting 2 goals, which cancelled out a goal from Bai Jung-ho in the first half for Stoke. And Chris, as you said, Stoke, another team who we thought finally clicking, but this now puts them 3 points behind Middlesbrough and only 3 points out of falling outside of the playoff bracket. So they have to be careful regardless of where they're sat in the league table.
Yeah. As for who creeps up on them, I think the only team an immediate threat to them behind them is Ipswich, but Millwall are also there. But then you look at their form, which you've just doomed to worsen. So I think this midweek game is a must-win for them, no matter who they're playing. It doesn't matter who the opposition is. It's now a must-win game for Stoke to get some momentum back behind the team.
Absolutely, and it's a big result for Leicester as well. They're finally, there's 2 wins in a row now. They're sort of piecing it together. 3 decent results on the spin after what was a shocking run. It was just draw central for them for a while. So nice to see them sort of turn draws into wins. Obviously, they are in 10th as well. They're one of the teams also on 24 points. So they're also already 1 point outside of creeping in alongside your likes of Birmingham and Millwall. So it'll be intriguing to see how they go for the rest of the year. But as far as Stoke, I think they need to be careful because there's a lot of teams creeping, and they're arguable better teams than Stoke. So the best way you can do it is just holding out your lead and making sure you stay ahead, which Coventry are doing brilliantly well, as they know teams are creeping, so they just keep winning and winning and winning, because at the end of the day, if they win as many games as possible, they can't be caught. So, and I think Stoke know the same thing. The more you win, the lower your chances are of being caught out. So it'll be intriguing to see how they push on now. Oxford versus Middlesbrough, we sort of mentioned this already in the podcast, Chris, but Oxford hold Middlesbrough to a 1-1 draw at home. Morgan Whittaker's 54th minute goal wasn't enough to spur on a Middlesbrough win in this one away from home. Luke Harris was the one who put Oxford ahead early in the game, and a big result for Oxford, which keeps them out of the relegation zone for now. But most importantly, a big slip up from Middlesbrough, who are losing touch with Coventry at the top.
Yeah, and I don't think there's too much to say about this game that we haven't already said, really. We seem to have managed to cover this game in depth a lot throughout.
Yeah, what I will say is obviously Middlesbrough have their appointment now. Kim Hellberg is in as the new manager. As a Swansea fan, obviously I know all about him because he was basically signed with us until a couple of days before this happened, and Middlesbrough swooped in and is now their new manager. So obviously an exciting young coach who plays a very nice style of football. So I'm sure that'll be a big one for them, see if they can reignite the spark after they've lost it in the last couple of weeks under their interim manager, who's a brilliant interim manager, but only 1 win of the last 5. It's not good enough to keep up with the Coventry team, who are absolutely flying at the top of the table. Portsmouth versus Millwall, probably a bit of an upset. Obviously, we spoke about Millwall being just outside the playoffs, but it was Portsmouth who come away with the 3 points at Fratton Park. We sort of mentioned this in our preview about how Fratton Park wasn't what it was last season, wasn't the fortress so far, but it looked more like the Fratton Park that we knew and the home form that we saw from Portsmouth last season. Goals from Swanson, an own goal from Cranmer, and Williams cancel out an Ivanovic goal late on for Millwall, as well as a red card. A pretty disastrous day for Millwall, things considered, Chris, but Portsmouth showing signs of life again after another team that's been struggling.
Yeah, and Portsmouth are a lot like Oxford when they get a lot of criticism that they're not really up to the standard of this division. But if there's ever a result to go out there and get, it's that.
Yeah, I mean, you got Josh Murphy, in this team, who are excellent footballers. There's 2 assists for him in this one again, which is a big part of why they win this game. As far as Millwall go, again, it's just inconsistency is going to kill some of these teams at the top half of this table. You look, that's no wins in the last 4 now for Millwall. They're really, really struggling, and I think as far as Portsmouth go, they need to keep this form up, because we spoke about teams being in false positions, especially down the bottom half of the table, and you'd fancy the team like Sheffield United to climb away, which then opens up a spot for teams like Portsmouth that they could fall into if they're not careful. So I think it's imperative for Portsmouth that they keep this run going, because they need to keep the points up. And as I said, with Stoke sort of keep in touch away from the teams in the playoff race by winning and winning and winning, Portsmouth to do it to make sure they don't slip into the relegation battle very, very quickly, because as you said, on pure quality, there are teams below them that have better teams on paper, and you would expect to pull away from the relegation trouble in the coming weeks. But our final game of the week, very, very unlucky to miss out on our featured 6 that we topped in turn with this one for a while with the Derby game, but it was Hull QPR at Loftus Road, and it was a big 3-2 win for QPR, coming back from behind twice in this game to take all 3 points in a 3-2 win. Obviously, Hull now dropped to 6th in the table, and a Hull team that we've spoken so much of their credit to in this one, Chris, you have to say, not really at the races in this one, based on every aspect of this game. It looks like QPR dominated and Hull just could not put them away.
Yeah, and I think, we spoke about QPR in the past and how they went so long without losing after that 7-1 drubbing by Coventry. I think it goes to show they're probably one of the teams with the most character in the league, adding to that by coming from behind twice as well. So I think QPR would be a team to watch next season if they can get this form clicking and just iron out these errors that seem to be happening that cause a lack of consistency at the club.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been impressed with QPR this year. I'll be brutally honest. I think when they beat us, it was very poor. It was more us being bad than them being good. And it reflected in the next couple of games. They lost 3 games on a spin, conceding 7 goals, only scoring twice. And then a 0-0 draw with Sheffield United, who are obviously where they are. So, they needed a win here. I think, obviously, you have to give Hull their credit. They have been absolutely battered with injuries in the last couple of weeks. Obviously, losing your top scorer in Ollie McBurney. It's just an absolute disaster for Hull in the situation that they're in. But their players have stepped up really well. I think even in this one, it was not a bad performance at times. I think they just got... If you look at the stats, QPR did dominate. And I think they were the worthy winners in the end. But Hull had a chance to put this game away twice, and they just couldn't hold on. And it's been uncharacteristic of a side. We sort of mentioned it. They're very prone to conceding on counter-attacks, and they're quite open defensively at times. And it finally sort of came through in a result, which it hasn't for a while, by conceding 3 goals and losing the game. It's not what we've seen of Hull in recent weeks, but a tough game against Ipswich on Tuesday as well. They're going to need to make sure they don't fall into a terrible run, because they will be, as you said, you expect them to lose touch with the playoffs, and they will if they are not careful with the next couple of games. But that is all we have for you this week for our review. So we will be back later in the week, obviously, to speak about the midweek games and obviously our review episodes as well. There'll also be a special episode coming out later in the week, so keep your eyes peeled on the channel for that. We have a very special guest joining us on the channel. But until then, thank you very much to Chris for joining me as always, and we will see you all later in the week.